firstly, I thought The Imposter was an astonishing movie, and I think that many people could argue that it's inevitable given the story, but it takes someone with good comic timing to tell a good joke, and I think you've done a quite astounding job, Bart. You must be thrilled with the film.
Yeah, first of all, yeah, thank you very much. I mean, it is one of those stories which is so extraordinary, I suppose, that I would have had to make a real mess of it to completely screw it up. But I'm really pleased. I think it was always the intention to try and create a different kind of documentary. A film that people who probably would avoid watching documentaries in the cinema might go to and have a very surprising experience. So yeah, no, it's great that people have responded to it in that way. Yeah.
No, I was just saying, as a sort of documentary filmmaker, you must have just been rubbing your hands with glee when you heard about this story.
Yeah, I think it's very rare. I mean, I've made a lot of documentaries, and I think it is rare that you come across a story that, I suppose, if it was a work of fiction, you wouldn't believe it really. It turned out that there was a lot of people sort of sniffing around the story. There was a French company that had made a sort of fictionalized version based on it, which I don't think was terribly widely seen. But I was amazed that no one had made a documentary, and it turned out that as we started trying to make it, that various companies came out of the woodwork claiming to have the rights, and in fact another company that was based in Texas suddenly appeared saying that they had signed an agreement with Frederick and they had paid him money to go and to secure his life rights or the rights to do it. And of course he turned up to meet an envoy of theirs at a station in Paris and then disappeared with their money and never to be seen again. So they began making a film about having been conned by him, as we began making this film as well. So yeah, but I think I think you could wait a long time to. I certainly feel like I'll wait a long time to come across another story as extraordinary as this one.
And Charlie, when you were first approached, were you instantly sort of up for being in this movie?
To be in the movie, not instantly, but because other people had come up with ideas and wanting to do something about the imposter, but stories, things like that. But when I met Bart, I was convinced. He got me from hello, and I was convinced that he would let me tell my story. And that's the beauty of this movie. Each person gets to tell their story as to what they think happened. And then the audience can pick the story they like the best.
And so what was it about Bart sort of opening hello then that was so convincing to make you want to get
I don't
involved?
know, except that I think he really cared about what happened in the story. And a lot of people didn't. A lot of people had just heard things, and I felt an empathy there, and I go by that. I kind of go by that. So.
And you're one of many sort of very close interview, sort of access you got. Obviously speaking to Frederick, I mean, what was that like? I mean, were you quite surprised at how open he was and how much he sort of gave off to you?
Yeah, I mean, Frederick is an unusual person to deal with because you don't just feel, you don't have one straightforward reaction to him. He can be charming and very likable and invite sympathy, and at the same time you're aware that he's done some pretty despicable things. So it's not straightforward, and I certainly wanted the audience's experience of him to be reflective of that. That actually that he's a rather unreliable narrator, an unreliable witness on one level. And of course, as a documentary maker, you sit down and you hear this story and you start to believe it. And at the point that you start to believe it and kind of relate to it is the point at which you realise that possibly you're on the receiving end of some of that manipulation and some of that, the storytelling which he's basically been doing his whole life. And I felt that it was important, that the right way in which to tell this story was to allow the audience to have, connection with him, and that you'd get, so rather than you're kind of looking down a microscope at a group of characters that you can't really relate to on any level, you're actually inside this experience. You know, you hear everyone's story and you look them in the eye and you go on all of these journeys simultaneously with them. And that felt to me like a much more interesting way of trying to tell this story.
He's been spinning his web of lies for 30 some odd years. Now, you've been a reporter for a while, and you get better and better as you do more. He gets better and better. Bart does as he directs more. But this guy's been doing this since a child, from the time he was in an orphanage to convince people to give him more food, from the time he pretended to be here, pretended to be there, and manipulating people is what he's a master of.
Well, can you, as two people who spent time with him, just speaking to him and sort of engaging with him, can you see how he does it? Can you get that from him?
I think the accent helps. I think he speaks softly, and that helps. He does not intrude on you, but he knows how to work people.
I think that's true. I mean, I think that goes back to what I was saying about, he looks straight down the lens at the viewer, and I think, again, the idea is that you should in some way get a similar experience to the one that I did in interviewing him. That you will find yourself sympathising with him on some level, even though perhaps you know that you shouldn't. But he's a talented and incredibly intelligent, incredibly clever man. Unfortunately, he's used some of that intelligence in possibly rather not ideal ways. Possibly if he devoted all of that energy and all of that brilliance to something else, he would have been incredible. He could have been a brilliant actor. I think he is a brilliant actor. He just isn't. He's acting in his own story rather than anyone else's.
And was he always quite keen to get on board? Did he show any sort of hesitancies?
Yeah, I mean, he's not a terribly trusting guy, and he was very. I think he was sceptical about us and me and my team, and but at the same time, as you see, he's not a shy individual, and he courts attention. I think one of the things that he's said, which I'm sure is there's an element of truth in, is that he confuses attention and affection. I think that's something. He's spent his life looking for attention and looking for affection, and I think media attention is not something that he shies away from.
In his 6 years at prison, he spent most of the time reading books about sociology, books about psychology, books that would learn him to know what you're thinking about him and give him answers to feed back to you. He's very skilled at doing this.
Charlie, I mean, you've obviously been a sort of investigator, detective for such a long time. Have you ever stumbled across a case anywhere near as absurd as this one?
Maybe one close to it, but not near as absurd. No. It's just, it's a case of a lifetime for a private investigator.
And just finally, I think one of the most fascinating things in The Imposter is that you actually use real acting. There was actually sort of reconstructions or things. Was that always to enhance the kind of cinematic aspect to it and almost to validate its cinematic release? Yeah,
I think definitely. I don't think that's the right treatment for every kind of documentary by any stretch. I think certainly it was the right one for this particular story. I think drama in documentary can be a really dirty word in TV, let alone in movies. But I also think it's about. I think where drama can be problematic is where you're on some level trying to convince the audience that they're watching something other than what they are. I think if you're trying to convince the audience that they're watching a piece of archive, whereas actually it's something that you've reconstructed, I think that's problematic. With this, I wanted to go the other way. I think, with the drama elements are supposed to be a sort of extension of all of this subjective storytelling. If a great storyteller tells you a great story, or you read a novel, you have a kind of movie that plays in your head, and that can be quite a visual experience. And I suppose it was that I wanted to recreate, rather than telling the audience this is what must have happened here. It's about spending time inside these people's stories, and and making a virtue of the fact that there isn't one version of the truth. There's a number of versions. And just finally, where are you going to? What's next for you? Where do you go from The Imposter? It's going to be quite tricky to
to make another document. Well, I'm sure you will make another documentary after this, but it's going to be quite a difficult thing to do, I suppose, having sort of found this quite mesmerising story.
Well, that's kind of you to say. Yeah, it probably will. I mean, I certainly think it's unlikely that I will come across a story which is as unusual as this. I mean, I think that, you wait a long time. But I am interested in this idea of sort of slightly, blurring, people are very keen to categorise, it's either a fiction film or it's a documentary, and it's, and I think there's another way of telling true stories which can appeal to people who wouldn't go and see a documentary. Most of us don't want to see a documentary in the cinema, and I think this is hopefully this is an exception to that. So I'm working on another story which is also a kind of, if it wasn't true, you would never believe it kind of thing. I'm not sure it has quite the layers of The Imposter, but we'll see.
Thanks so much for your time, Brad.
It's a pleasure. Thanks.